Solve and write the solution in interval notation. 1/3 minus 2 over x squared is less than 5 over 3x. So if we write that out, we have 1/3 minus 2 over x squared is less than 5 over 3x. We're going to subtract the 5 over 3x to the left side so that we can get a 0 on the right side. So we have 1/3 minus 2 over x squared minus 5 over 3x, and that's going to be less than 0. Okay, now what we need to do is we need to find a common denominator so that we can subtract all three of these fractions. So we need to find out what is the LCD for these three fractions. We know that 3 is part of the LCD, and we also know that x squared is part of the LCD. So what that means is the new denominator is going to be 3x squared. So for each of these three fractions, the denominator is going to be 3x squared. And we know it's going to be less than 0. But what we want to do now is we want to be able to figure out what is the new numerator. So we have 3 times what's going to give us x squared. Well, this is 3 times x squared, so 1 times x squared is x squared. Okay, x squared times what's going to give us 3x squared. Well, we're going to multiply that by 3. So 2 times 3 is going to give us 6. 3x is times what's going to give us 3x squared. Well, that's times x. So this is 5 times x, which is 5x. So now we know what that numerator is going to be. So now let's combine our numerator. So we have x squared. The next term is going to be minus 5x. And then this is going to be minus 6. And then we're going to divide it by the common denominator, which is 3x squared. And that's less than 0. So in the numerator, now that we have a trinomial, we need to factor that trinomial. So if we factor that trinomial, we know that the denominator is going to be 3x squared. Okay, let's make our x. We know that we have -6 and then we have -5. So what two numbers can we multiply to get -6? Then when we add them together, it's going to give us -5. Well, it's going to be a +1 and a -6. So therefore, this becomes x plus 1 times x minus 6. And we know that that's less than 0. Now what we need to do is we need to find our critical points. Okay, so the numerator is x plus 1 times x minus 6, and we want to set that equal to 0. So if we set x plus 1 equal to 0, or x minus 6, which is equal to 0, we know that we have x is equal to -1 or x is equal to 6. And then in a denominator where it makes it undefined, we have 3x squared, which is equal to 0. If we divide both sides by 3, we have x squared, which is equal to 0. If we take the square root of both sides, then x is going to equal 0. So what this tells us is that we have 3 critical points. Okay? So what we're going to do is now we're going to create our number line. So what does our number line tell us? Well, we have a critical point at 0. We also have a critical point at -1 and 6. So we have a critical point at -1, and then we also have a critical point at 6. So now let's go ahead and create our regions. So we have our region. We have something here. And then we have another one here. So what this tells us is that we have 1, 2, 3, and we have 4 regions. Okay, now let's identify what are the interval notations for each region. So we're going to go from -infinity to -1. It's going to be parenthesis regardless because it says less than, doesn't say less than or equal to, even for the undefined. So therefore, it's going to go from -infinity to -1. For region number 2, it's going to go from -1 to 0. For region number 3, it's going to go from 0 to 6. And for region number 4, it's going to go from 6 to positive infinity. So now what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and then test each region. So in region number 1, we can pick the value of x to be -2, since it falls within that region. And so if we look down here at step number 5, we can use that as our inequality where it's less than 0. So we have x plus 1 times x minus 6 over 3x squared, and we want to determine if that's going to be less than 0. So we have -2 plus 1 times -2 minus 6 all over 3 times -2 squared. Okay, so if we take -2 and then add 1, that's going to give us -1. -2 minus 6 is going to give us -8. And then this is going to be 3 times -2 squared is +4. So -1 times -8 is +8 over 3 times 4, which is 12. And we don't need to go any further because we already know it's a positive number and it's not less than 0. So then we're going to have to say that it's false for region number 1. Okay, so now we're going to take a look at region number 2. Okay, so we need to pick a number between -1 and 0. Well, we're going to have to pick -0.5 since it's between those two numbers. So again, we're going to use x plus 1 times x minus 6 all over 3x squared and set that to be less than 0. And so now let's plug in -0.5. So we have -0.5 plus 1 times -0.5 minus 6 divided by 3 times -0.5 squared, and we want to see if that's less than 0. Well, -0.5 plus 1 is +0.5. -0.5 minus 6 is -6.5. Okay, and then this is 3 times, well, what is -0.5 squared? Well, that gives us 0.25. Okay, and so what is -6.5 times 0.5? Well, that's going to give us -3.25. And then 3 times 0.25 gives us 0.75. Now, we don't need to go any further because we have a negative number in the numerator and we have a positive number in the denominator. And that tells us that regardless, this number is going to be negative, which means it's going to be less than 0. So we know that this is going to be a true result. So we know it's true here for region number 2. Okay, now we're going to go to region number 3. So region number 3, we can let x equal 1. So again, we have x plus 1 times x minus 6 all over 3x squared, and we want to make that less than 0. So we have 1 plus 1 times 1 minus 6 over 3 times 1 squared. Well, 1 plus 1 is 2. 1 minus 6 is -5. And this is 3 times 1 squared, which is 3. So this gives us -10 over 3, which is less than 0. And so therefore, it's also true here. So we know it's true for region number 3. And now let's take a look at region number 4. We're going to let x equal 7 since it comes after 6. And again, we have x plus 1 times x minus 6 over 3x squared. So we have 7 plus 1 times 7 minus 6 over 3 times 7 squared. So we have 8 times 1 over 3 times 49. And because this is a positive number, we know that a positive number cannot be less than 0. So therefore, it's going to be false for region number 4. So where do we see that it is true? Well, it's true in region 2. So we know -1 to 0. And then it's also true in region number 3, which is 0 and 6. Now keep in mind, we cannot include the 0. So we can't just go straight from -1 to 6 because 0 would make this undefined. So now what we're going to do is we're going to complete our result. So we know that it's true for what regions? We know it's true from -1 to 0, union 0 to 6.